Welcome to the Wellness Upgrade, the show where we take a deep dive into your lymphatic system, metabolic health, and the nutrition strategies that actually work. I'm JoAnn Clinton, a certified nutrition specialist candidate, clinical nutritionist, and certified lymphedema therapist. I've walked in your shoes, healing my own Hashimoto's after years in the high-stress corporate world, and now I help others find their way back to energy, clarity, and flow. Whether you're managing swelling, managing your hormonal health, struggling with fatigue, or you just want to feel more like yourself again, you'll find practical, science-backed tips here without the fluff, quick fixes, or Instagram myths. So, if you're ready to support your body from the inside out, you're in the right place. Hello, and welcome back. So, today we're going to talk about something many of us experience. You know, that feeling of waking up, maybe it's 2 a.m., maybe 3 a.m., maybe 4, or you're just staring at the ceiling. And do you ever wonder why? But it's not just something that's an annoying glitch in your sleep. And it's not something to take lightly. You know, I talk with clients a lot, and a lot of them, they just kind of brush it off like, well, yeah, I always get up at 3, 4 in the morning. And then sometimes they fall back to sleep, sometimes they don't. But this is something that's a message from your body. So your body is actually sending a clear signal. So today, I'm going to do a deep dive into decoding that specific wake-up call. And we're going to treat it less like an annoyance and more like it's a physiological clue that's hinting at something deeper. There's some pattern that's knocking your system off balance when it should be resting. And that's the mission today here. We're going to understand what those signals, sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're not so subtle, what those signals actually mean. And then we're going to explore the common culprits behind these 2 to 4 a.m. wake-ups. We're talking blood sugar, stress hormones, thyroid hormones in general, and then even liver function and your gut as well. We're going to talk about those too. And then we're going to go into some specific lab tests that can actually shed some light on your pattern so you can get some real answers. So let's get ready. Let's get armed with the info you need to hopefully get some uninterrupted sleep. But first, let's dive into the disclaimer before we go any further into this podcast. The information in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical condition. I am not your personal healthcare provider, and this content should not replace individualized medical advice. Always consult your physician or qualified healthcare professional before making changes to your diet, supplements, medication, or lifestyle. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking care because of something you heard on this show. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's start with the basics. We have the circadian rhythm. Now, most people know about it. It's the body's internal clock, the master clock, which is guided by hormones. So you have melatonin that makes you sleepy, and then you have cortisol that wakes you up. And normally, cortisol should be hitting rock bottom in the middle of the night, so it should be nice and low. And then it starts to creep up gently, maybe around 4 or 5 or 6 to get you ready for the day. So it's more of a gentle increase. But that 2 to 4 a.m. wake up, that's the anomaly that we're looking at today. So if you're consistently waking, then it often signals that something is triggering cortisol or maybe adrenaline way too early, and it's jolting you awake. The big ones we see are issues of blood sugar. We also see how stress impacts your cortisol rhythm. We look at things like thyroid function. We're going to look at hormonal health changes in digestion. But let's start with blood sugar. So we're not always talking about a diagnosable or somebody who's been diagnosed with hypoglycemia. And it's often more subtle. So just think about your brain, and your brain needs a steady fuel supply overnight. So glucose is the fuel. And Glucose, if your levels dip too low while you're asleep, but your body is going to read that dip as a mini emergency, which is essentially a fuel crisis. So what's going to happen in response to that crisis is going to pump out cortisol and adrenaline to quickly raise your blood sugar level back up. And boom, that hormonal surge is like an alarm clock, and it wakes you up. So what labs should people be looking at for blood sugar? Definitely the basics. You want the fasting glucose. Aim for 75 to 100 ideally. Then you've got your hemoglobin A1C, which is your average over time. And you want to aim for maybe under 5.3%. And your fasting insulin, and this is something that's not everybody is aware of, but that's key too. So fasting insulin ideally should be between 2 and 5, and that's measured in micro international units per milliliter. And there's this fascinating study that showed even mild dips in blood sugar at night, the kind you wouldn't even notice, can fire up your sympathetic nervous system enough to wake you. So it's a real stress response, even if you're sound asleep. And just think of it this way, your body is trying to protect itself. So when you look at it from that perspective, it all starts to make a lot of sense. But what if it's not fuel that's waking you? What if it's stress? We also underestimate stress's physiological effects on our body. And how well does it specifically cause that 2 to 4 a.m. wake up? Well, it comes back to cortisol, but in a different way. Chronic stress really messes with something called your HPA axis. That's your main stress response system, and that stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, right? So we're talking about 3 different organs that are involved. So instead of cortisol being lowest at night, somebody who's chronically stressed, it can cause it to spike right at that 2 to 4 a.m. window. So your body's hitting the accelerator instead of the brake. And perfectly put, it creates an internal restlessness which makes sleep much more fragmented. And you just can't stay asleep. So how do you test for that specific pattern? And that's where we look at things like the salivary cortisol test or Dutch tests come in really handy. And they can map your cortisol levels throughout the day. And so you can kind of see your rhythm. And you can literally see if there's a peak happening right around the time you're waking up. And research backs this up. Studies clearly link these disrupted cortisol rhythms to poor fragmented sleep. So it's not just feeling stressed during the day, it's the underlying physiological shifts that are happening while you sleep. And it could become a pattern even if you feel like you're managing stress okay day to day. It's that cumulative biological effect. Okay, so moving on, we're now going to talk about thyroid function. And this is massively overlooked in sleep issues because people think the thyroid equals metabolism, weight, and energy levels, right? But it's really a master regulator. And it heavily influences your circadian rhythm too. And get this, both low thyroid function and high thyroid function can trigger those early morning wake-ups. So hypothyroidism, low thyroid hormone, especially low T3, can actually mess with blood sugar stability. Brings us back to our first point. And then it can also impair melatonin production, which is also bad for staying asleep. So then we also have hyperthyroidism, which means we have too much thyroid hormone, which that can make you feel wired, anxious, and can also cause raising heart rate. So basically, that can put your nervous system into overdrive, which is definitely not conducive to sleeping soundly through the night. So checking the thyroid is crucial, but TSH levels just isn't going to be enough. So we want the whole picture. So we really need to look at free T4, free T3, which T3 is the active hormone in your cells that your cells are actually going to use. So for free T3, I like to see if it's in that sweet spot, roughly between 3 and 4 picograms per milliliter, but ranges vary. And everything's going to be very individualized. Also, I like to look at reverse T3, which can show if stress or illness is blocking that T3. And also want to look at thyroid antibodies, like TPO, and then you've got thyroid globulin antibodies. So you want to check if there's an autoimmune condition like Hashimoto's that's actually affecting the thyroid's ability to produce thyroid hormone. So that's a fairly comprehensive panel, and it needs to be. And studies show even subclinical hypothyroidism, where TSH is just borderline, significantly ups the risk of poor sleep and waking at night. It's subtle, but yet powerful. Okay, so moving on to the liver. How does a liver tie into waking up at 2 a.m.? Well, think about the liver's job. Detoxification, metabolism. It's working hard, especially overnight. And when is it most active? Well, peak activity is often cited as being between 1 and 3 a.m. according to traditional Chinese medicine. And physiologically, it's definitely busy then. So if your liver is overburdened, maybe from alcohol, medications, with poor diet, environmental toxins, it might struggle during this peak time, like it's working overtime and making a lot of noise. It creates this metabolic stress, or maybe this internal activity, let's say, that it can be enough to disturb your sleep and wake you up. So what labs will give us some clues here? So we have our standard liver enzymes. So we look for labs like ALT, AST, GGT. So elevated levels can indicate stress. Also, things like bilirubin and triglycerides can point towards metabolic burden affecting the liver. And there's research linking liver markers to sleep. So there's a known connection. And one study found that higher ALT levels correlated with more insomnia symptoms. And it suggests a stressed liver can definitely play a role. So there's a very fascinating study I wanted to share with you from research, talking about inflammation, because we hear about inflammation a lot. But I wanted to bring your attention to the study that was published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine that looked at insomnia symptoms and how long people actually slept. And they were measured by a sleep study. They defined insomnia symptoms as having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. Then they grouped people into short sleepers, 7 hours or less, average sleepers, 7 to 8 hours, and long sleepers, 8 hours or more. What they found was pretty striking. So adolescents with insomnia symptoms had significantly higher levels of inflammation, and they measured it by C-reactive protein, or CRP. And those who both had insomnia and slept 7 hours or less had C-reactive protein levels of about 1.8 milligrams per liter. Compare that to less than 1 milligram per liter in kids who slept well, or even those who had insomnia but got a full 8 hours of sleep. So in plain English, when you combine poor sleep and short sleep, inflammation skyrockets, even as early as the teenage years, and this low-grade inflammation is thought to be a common pathway leading to chronic health problems in adulthood. So I will link the study in the show notes if you'd like to read it for yourself. Now let's talk hormones again, but specifically for women. So we're talking about perimenopause, menopause, which are big sleep disruptors. Estrogen and especially progesterone decline, sleep can really take a hit. Progesterone is naturally calming. It helps boost GABA, that neurotransmitter that tells your brain to chill out and sleep. So less progesterone, less GABA activity, harder to stay asleep. And you'll get more easily aroused, leading to those classic early morning wake-ups. It's a very common symptom. So lab-wise, what should we look at? So the key hormones would be estradiol, estrone, progesterone itself, maybe DHEAS, and definitely a full thyroid panel again. And why thyroid? Because thyroid and sex hormones, they are deeply interconnected. Changes in one often impact the other. And then we have studies that are also going to be listed in the show notes that will confirm this link. So lots of research on postmenopausal women frequently report these early awakenings directly linked to hormone fluctuations. It's well established, and it really paints a picture of how interconnected everything is. Now, before we close out the female hormone section, I want to talk a little bit about something called the Dutch test. And that stands for dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. It's a functional lab that goes way beyond the standard blood test. So the blood test gives us a snapshot, while the Dutch test uses dried urine samples collected over a period of time that lets us see not just hormone levels, but the patterns of how your body makes, uses, and clears them. So for example, it's going to measure cortisol rhythm access throughout the day. It's going to measure DHEA, progesterone, testosterone, estrogens, and all three estrogens, plus how your body is metabolizing those hormones. And that's huge because sometimes it's not just about how much estrogen or cortisol you make, it's about whether you're detoxing and clearing them properly. And this is especially helpful for people who wake up between 2 to 4 a.m. because it can reveal whether your cortisol is spiking in the middle of the night or whether your estrogen and progesterone are out of balance. So it really gives us a good roadmap that a single blood draw just can't provide. Okay, now moving on to the final area, we're going to talk about digestive function. So how can my gut wake me up at 3 a.m.? Well, it might seem indirect, but the gut-brain axis is also very powerful. Issues like gut imbalances, SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, hidden infections, maybe things like acid reflux or gallbladder problems can cause discomfort. So even low-grade inflammation or discomfort that you aren't fully conscious of can trigger a stress response. So back to cortisol again, right? So that discomfort signals the body to make cortisol, and then bam, you're awake. So what kind of testing can help uncover gut issues related to sleep? Well, I like to use a comprehensive stool test like a GI map, and they're really valuable because they look at bacteria, yeast, parasites, inflammation markers, and digestive markers. So it really gives you a snapshot of the microbiome. And you might also look at things like zonulin, and that's going to indicate if we have something called intestinal hyperpermeability, or you've heard of things like leaky gut. So it's the same thing, but I prefer intestinal hyperpermeability because that's really what it is. Or we look at things like the secretory IgA for gut immunity. And research is increasingly connecting the dots. So studies show how altered gut microbiomes are linked with messed up sleep patterns. So we have these culprits: blood sugar, cortisol rhythms, thyroid, hormones, digestion, and that's a lot to consider. This is showing that your body is usually pointing to one or more of these areas. So for someone listening who consistently wakes up between that 2 to 4 a.m. window, what are the practical first steps? Well, where do you start? So I think the most empowering first step is considering the labs. Get the data, look at blood sugar markers, get that cortisol rhythm test, a full thyroid pattern, check your liver enzymes and hormones if they're relevant for you, and get your personalized roadmap. So now we want to talk about nutrition. So simple things can help. So try eating dinner maybe 3, ideally 4 hours before bed to give your digestion some time, especially if it's digestion that's causing you to wake up. And definitely avoid alcohol near bedtime and late night sugary snacks. So those can wreak havoc on blood sugar and liver function. And then if you do have low blood sugar, or if your blood sugar is dipping, you can experiment. So if you suspect low blood sugar is waking you up, maybe a small snack with protein and a healthy fat, like a handful of almonds or a tablespoon of seed butter about 30 minutes before bed, can sometimes help stabilize those levels overnight. And again, it's worth experimenting with. And when I work with clients, I like to call these food experiments. In the realm of supplements, you can look at magnesium. Magnesium is a good starting point for many people. Magnesium glycinate, maybe 200 to 400 milligrams, is very, very calming. And if you strongly suspect cortisol spikes are the issue, you can look at phosphatidylserine, maybe 100 to 200 milligrams at night can help buffer that stress response. And then we've also got our lifestyle basics. You can't forget those. You want to keep the bedroom cool, dark, and quiet, which is absolutely fundamental. Minimize screen time before bed. That blue light really messes with melatonin production. Maybe try some gentle breath work or meditation. Even just 5 minutes helps calm the nervous system. It's simple stuff, but always overlooked. Well, I shouldn't say always, but often. And it makes a huge difference. So wrapping this up, the big message here seems to be if you're constantly waking up between 2 to 4 a.m., don't just brush it off. So wrapping this up, the message here is if you are constantly waking up between 2 and 4 a.m., don't just brush it off. It's communication that your body is sending a clear signal basically saying, hey, look over here. And by investigating these potential root causes, blood sugar, cortisol, thyroid, liver, hormones, gut health, using the right tests and making targeted changes, you really can find answers and get back to sleep throughout the night. And it's about becoming a detective for your own health. And it's listening carefully to those signals, which leads to a final thought for everyone listening. If your body is sending these specific signals about sleep, and these are signals that we sometimes overlook, what are the other subtle messages that our body might be sending us throughout the day? What other clues about your overall well-being might you be overlooking, just thinking that they're just normal and it's just a part of getting older? But it really makes you think about our bodies, as this is an incredible source of information. Your body is always communicating, and we just need to learn to listen.